Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're super excited to have you all join us today. Just a reminder, make sure you follow us on all of our social media channels so that you stay connected with us no matter what events we have coming up. We're super excited to have you here today. Again, don't forget to ask all your questions and leave them in the chat box. I am very excited to be your host for this evening. My name is Christy, and I am part of the business development and sales team here at RMDS Lab. We are so excited to have you all here to enjoy Steve Navarro's What to Know About Pursuing a Career in Data Science and Machine Learning. RMDS Lab is a data science company that specializes in helping researchers and data scientists worldwide to excel in a new era of big data and cognitive computing. And if you are not already a member, we want you to join our ecosystem today. RMDS Lab was founded in 2009 by IBM Chief Data Scientist Alex Liu and is headquartered in Pasadena, California, with partners worldwide. We serve more than 40,000 members and affiliates around the world. Without further ado, we are so excited to have Steve Navarro. He is the Manager, Talent Acquisition of Walmart Global Tech. Steve is a recruiting and human resource professional with 15 years of experience in the technology recruiting space. He has held recruiting and talent acquisition leadership roles with various companies such as Intel, Applied Materials, 8x8, ASML, and most recently, Walmart Global Tech. He is currently a manager of talent acquisition, overseeing the finding and hiring of data scientists, engineering and analytics talent for Walmart omnichannel supply chain and merchant data science teams. His expertise includes candidate sourcing, interviewing, candidate coaching, interview prep, and salary negotiation. Steve completed a Bachelor of Science in Human Resource Management from San Francisco State University under the guidance and mentorship of Dr. John Sullivan. He has spent 9 years as director for a faith-based community employment and career counseling center in San Jose, California. All right, thank you everyone for joining us. And now Steve, take it away.
Hello there. My name is Steve Navarro. I'm a technical recruiter with Walmart. I'm was tapped by this org to be able to run through some best practices in trying to find a job in data science and machine learning. There's quite a bit of content in here, but I want to set the expectation up front. I'm not going to just talk or read off the slides through the entire time. My idea is, intent here is to be able to run through these slides, try to call out maybe the key takeaways, some things that kind of really stand out to me. Anybody that's interested to get the slide deck, if you can't get it from this group, from Erica or the group, I'm comfortable if you ping me directly and I can send it to you. There's nothing in here that should be proprietary or confidential, and it's information I'm comfortable sharing with anybody. Okay. Why don't we get started? So if you don't mind, Erica, if you could hit the next slide. And I apologize, I'm gonna shorten this. Are we, by the way, are we looking to record this session?
Yes, it's being recorded.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So a little bit of today's table of contents. So I just wanted to run through these briefly. This actually doesn't represent all of the slides. There are a couple I've injected in between a few of these, but I'll just speak a little bit to each. 1 and 2, I just talk a little bit about myself, and those are probably going to be a very short conversation. But you get a little bit of background on what a technical recruiter looks like here. I'm not prototypical of every single recruiter at Walmart. Different folks have different backgrounds, but this is what I bring to the table. The next couple of slides provide some insight on what I've seen out in industry, the kind of roles and kind of some background on companies that might be hiring, especially around the Silicon Valley. The next 3, 5 through 7, speak to actions and kind of the stages for getting attention and kind of what to call out once you've gone through those engagement efforts with companies that are hiring. It's not an absolute. I mean, obviously, that process you tweak it a bit for your own experience, but these are things that I've seen candidates experience. Lastly, I ask questions, provide my contact information, and then I have some final thoughts at the end, just to kind of think through. Hopefully, it's food for thought that help you on your way. Next slide, please. So a little bit about myself. I mentioned before that I'm a technical recruiter at Walmart Global Tech. I've actually been here about 3 years. My main focus is on data hiring. So I hire for things like data scientists, data engineers, analysts, and other similar types of competencies. Formal titles that I hire for include staff, principal, senior, data scientist, data engineer, and whatnot. I've also hired for software engineers, for architects at different levels. I've also hired product management as well as other positions for the company. A little bit about my personal background. I've actually been in industry for about 20 plus years. I graduated with a degree from San Francisco State in HR management, and then I kind of segued into an HR field, a recruiting field, but I actually had detoured a bit for about 7 years. I spent that time working in proposals and sales. So I actually spent my time learning industry and kind of getting visibility on that end of it. And then I pivoted and actually went into the recruiting side to be able to help draw people in and work for the companies that I support. In my pedigree, if you pull up my LinkedIn profile, you'll see it's a sampling of the companies I've worked for, and they include really big players like Intel and also smaller companies like ASML. The ones that are listed in there include SBTC and a few others. I've supported like defense companies, semiconductor manufacturing, software companies, all kinds. One thing to pay attention to also is, if you notice, I'm not a tech person by trade. I didn't get an engineering degree. I've come up through engineering firms, and that's where a lot of my business acumen and technical acumen come from. Okay. One of the things that is not listed in there that I did want to call out is that I've also been a career coach and career counselor for a community-based employment center. I did that for about 9 years. And so I've had that experience of looking at a job search from the other side, where I partner with people that are looking for work, help them to deconstruct what are the things about them that they want to get out there in the world, to demonstrate their value to prospective employers, and help them strategize on where to look and how to best position themselves. So it's a little bit of background on me as well. Next slide, please. And by the way, I also wanted to mention, before I get into this, just as an aside, I'd ask for folks to please hold questions till the end. Unless there's something that's burning and you really need to know, I'd prefer to kind of circle back to any subject matter. So what I do ask for folks to do is make sure to take note of what slide it is that you have a question about, or just a general topic, and please articulate the question. I'm going to ask people to send questions through the chat function, if that's okay, Erica, and then we'll take them in turn. That way we're not stepping all over each other trying to answer questions. The other thing I try to look for when I respond to questions is if I get 3 or 4, 2 or 3 of the same people answering, I'm going to try to address those different questions in one response. Okay. A little bit about about why I'm here and why I like to do this stuff. A lot of it is up there. The one that's my favorite is I get bored talking to myself. If you meet recruiters and they connect with you about positions out there in industry, you find that most of them tend to be social animals. We like to be extroverted to a certain degree, some more than others. I love learning about people and about where they come from and what they bring to the table. I also try to pick up learning from each interaction to help me better my disposition at being able to work with folks. So I pay attention to what people tell me. I'm really curious about kind of what they bring to the table, and I love the idea of trying to find that right fit between prospective candidate and company. Okay. So that's that. Next slide, please. This is a sampling of a number of the jobs that I've found. You'll find these types of positions at Walmart, most likely in other companies as well. The top three are probably the most common: data scientist, engineer, and analyst. Each of them speak to different aspects of the work. So a data scientist focuses a lot on the secret sauce, the machine learning algorithms that comprise the inner workings of technology, tools and APIs, basically the software tools that companies work with. A data engineer, much of the time, focuses on the flow of data. In some environments, they read like a software engineer. In other environments, they read more like a data owner. They mainly work with technologies like Hadoop, Hive, Spark, big data type of tools, things like that. They do a lot of coding and programming. And then the analyst tends to be that person helping to build insights and provide the formatted data to leadership so they can make decisions. Each of them partner together in our environment to provide a complete product out to their client companies that they work with. Some of the other titles below speak to specialized roles in data. A machine learning engineer sometimes is interchangeable for a data scientist, but sometimes they stand out. In environments where companies may hire both, they may lean on data scientists to do more heavily focused research work and finding the best practices around the technology that you work with. And a machine learning engineer is more focused on execution. I've worked in some environments where a data scientist, most of everything that they do is very abstract. They take an abstract concept and translate that into an underlying algorithm, and then they hand it off to somebody else that does the actual coding. The other thing you may run into, especially in smaller environments, is a blending between these roles. You step into a role as a data scientist, but you find that there's also data analysis as a part of that work that you do. And so you're having to take off the data scientist hat and put on the analyst hat and support the team that way, and vice versa. So each environment kind of speaks a little bit differently to the needs of the company and also kind of the temperament of the team members that they employ. It's helpful to be clear on exactly what the role and scope of the work that you take on is. I also recommend that folks, when they're out there searching, to be flexible or to be open to take on different work that you may not have taken on initially. Folks that tend to be very rigid and only want to work as just a data scientist really narrow their options for the kind of roles that they can take on. It doesn't really show a lot of flexibility. Now, granted, it may be that you just found you've done work as a data analyst and you don't like it, or it's just not for you, and that's fine. But be aware that companies, sometimes their business needs change. The two roles below at the bottom for data architect and data steward are interesting. They speak a little bit of the future of the way work is, of work with data will be. Architecture speaking to the overall strategy for how it all fits together. And the steward really speaks to how important security is with regard to data. So as time goes on, you'll see those more and more of those type of positions out there. Okay, so next slide, if you don't mind. This role talks a little bit about the roles of within an organization. It's similar to any other kind of discipline. So it's not just unique to data. It could be in software engineering, it could be in product management, wherever else. But what you'll find is that usually you have a couple of different buckets that you fall into. Individual contributor versus, say, a management-related type of role or responsibility. Individual contributors mostly focus on their own work and efforts. Usually management would include technical leads, but also, people managers that are running teams all the way up to director and higher. The two lower categories really refer to adding on a skill set of being able to manage people, being able to manage process, performance, project management, and a few other things. They put a lot of emphasis in that. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, though, is these two things may not be mutually exclusive. And what I mean by that is, like within our organization, even if you're hired as individual contributor but a senior level person, if you're interested to work in management, our leadership team, our management team will work with you to get you the skills needed to be qualified to do that work. It isn't like, well, you're hired as an individual contributor and that's the only thing that you'll ever do here. It just depends on what your interests are. Not every environment is built like that. Some environments, they have a very rigid kind of structure and you only follow one career path and that's it. I think it's helpful when you go out to market and you're connecting with companies, get to learn what their culture is like and understand what that means. And that's something else I'm going to speak to in one of the future slides. Okay. Next, please. By the way, if I'm running through these really quickly, I understand I'm really kind of talking fast, so we probably burned through about half of the slides. If it seems like I'm going too fast or I'm talking too much, I don't know. I probably need to ask somebody to keep me honest. I don't know if Erica, if you'd be comfortable doing that. If there's anything that, or if there's a burning question out there that you want me to slow down and speak to, it's okay to speak up. I don't mind being interrupted. I'm going to talk a little bit to this next slide. So this represents me going out and just looking at the industry and seeing what kind of jobs are out there. One of the first things I did when I was kind of getting ready for this presentation was I started thinking about, okay, if I was looking for a data related position, how many jobs are out there and who's hiring? So I went on LinkedIn specifically on their job search function. I fed it the term data. I looked at the Bay Area, Silicon Valley Bay Area, and I specifically focused on anything that was refreshed within the last month or so. And what it returned, total number of hits was about 58,000 jobs across a variety of different companies throughout, across all of the Valley. And usually when it says SF Bay Area, you're talking about the East Bay, San Francisco, South Bay, all over the place, right? These were the top companies that were listed. I think there's about 8 of them. And as you notice, no surprises here, the usual suspects, Facebook, Amazon, Google, et cetera. Notice that they come from different walks of life. A lot of it's technology driven, but some of these, for example, one of the ones that's a big hiring company right now, it seems to be have big numbers, is Rivian, which is a autonomous car startup. So it's a car startup. In other words, they're a hardware manufacturer, but they're focusing a lot on data, right? That should tell you something about how important it is for the work, that goes into that. There was 2 hits off of this that didn't make this list, but I did list them towards the bottom. One called Biospace, which was a posting service. They had a comparable number of jobs to, say, maybe a little larger than Google, and Recruiting from Scratch, which is an agency. So both of them represent hiring across maybe multiple clients or companies. Biospace specifically is in the medical biotech industry. So it's pharmaceutical companies, healthcare companies, going through Biospace to post jobs to LinkedIn. And for me, that speaks to, consolidating and being able to kind of push their jobs through there. So it's encouraging because it also tells me that there's, additional companies, different industries. Next slide, please. This is just a quick screenshot of the job search that I ran. What you'll notice at the top, hopefully you can see that, is that there are different filters that are drop downs that you can adjust on the search. That's where my data came from. Now, the thing to keep in mind is I only use the term data to go run this search. If you feed it machine learning engineer, other search terms like TensorFlow or whatever else, you may get a good number of additional results. My instinct tells me you're probably looking at north of 100,000 jobs scattered around the Bay Area that will have relevance to data. I could easily see another additional 40,000 plus, represented within the Bay Area alone. I don't know if necessarily all of them are putting you to work here locally. So wherever walk of life you happen to be from, if you're not Bay Area based, I imagine there's similar numbers in other areas. But not all of them might necessarily be in tech. For example, if you're out of New York, it might be creative business. It could be tech because they have the Silicon Alley out there. But there's also other walks of life there, depending on what's important. Next slide, please. So how do I get attention? I listed a number of ways that people do get out there and get their names in the faces of others. The one that's my favorite out of this is the one at the bottom, which is undiscovered opportunities. The rest of these are pretty straightforward. Everybody does them. They can network, they get referred, they go and ask for help from their friends and make sure they maintain their social media footprint. They make sure LinkedIn and Facebook is up to date, and that's great. But what I thought was really interesting about the last one was it's basically speaks to writing your own ticket. Everything else above really speaks to a lot of competition that's out there. So there's always people out there hunting for jobs, trying to network, trying to get people's attention. They'll harass their friends. They'll go and make new friends in companies pursuing a job. They're always trying to refer to a particular role or need. What I like about the last bullet point was, what about the need that exists but just hasn't been articulated yet? One of my colleagues, who's a recruiter now for Walmart, had landed a job with a prior company she had worked with by getting to know one of their top influencers. She reached out and just was able to connect with this individual, really got to know him, and really got him to learn about what her interests are and background was. She had worked for them as an agency recruiter, had never recruited before, but she was just fascinated by the work. And in doing so, really kind of made a splash and an impact. And from there, parlayed that into a pretty long-standing career. Now she's a technical recruiter for us. She does exactly what I do. So anyway, next slide. One of the questions that folks may have is, what does Walmart look for? I wrote these at a high level. There's details under each, but essentially these are the core components that we consider against any of the technical hires we bring on. At the top of the list on this circle is technical competence. That's your mastery of technology, technical terms, technical concepts. How can you code? How do you know machine learning technology, all of that? Can you develop an algorithm and all of that? The rest of it, though, much of these are kind of more soft skills. Demeanor and enthusiasm is that energy level and that interest in really pursuing an opportunity at Walmart. Professional maturity is how well you carry yourself, but also, from your profile, how well have you navigated your career up to this point? Have you made the right choices or decisions for the stops you've made? What kind of impact have you had in prior roles that you've taken on? Demonstration of how you collaborate, how compatible you are with the team. That's important. And then obviously a drive to be able to, produce results for the company. The way that we vet that is finding out from you how you've been able to measure results and what you do. If something's not working, how do you fix it? All of these are things that we test for during the vetting process, through conversations that you have with the team, through the vetting during interviews, sometimes case studies or exercises. The whole idea is to get a sense of who you are holistically as a hire, and what kind of value do you bring to the company. Okay, next slide. This is an example of our core values. I'm not going to go down this list, but I just wanted to list it up there so that folks understand what is front of mind for our evaluators when they talk to you. They may not have a checklist that they run down and trying to checklist every single thing, but what they care about is, does this person demonstrate traits and qualities that align with these core values? In the end, any organization should have a set of guiding principles or core values that they go by. Now, this may not be just unique to data, obviously. This is about hiring and whether or not people make a decent fit here. But that should be at least in the mind of anybody that's out there on the job market that is interested in trying to make an impact to the place that they're looking to join. You definitely want to understand what they care about, what they find important, and make sure that it aligns with what you care about to make sure that you're in sync. If not, you may really struggle if you join that organization and you find out they just don't care what you care about. Next slide. So they do want to talk to me, and what should I know walking into it? There's a number of things I've highlighted on here, which is pretty straightforward in the interview process or the vetting process. I do recommend that folks take the time to prepare accordingly. One of the things that I didn't really list on here is invest time, not just rush into the process of getting your face in front of somebody. You do need to kind of compose yourself a bit. Make sure that you're set up for success, because the impression of you through the interview process and meeting you and getting to know you, that's going to kind of paint the picture of who you are as a potential employee. So you want to, if you have an interview that's being set up and you don't feel that you're ready for it, it's in your best interest to try and schedule at a time that's more conducive for you to present well. I wouldn't wait months and months to try and prepare for it, but you got to kind of give some thought to what's in your best interest and how well you can prepare for it. So I definitely recommend take the time, do your homework, be able to gather all of these things. Put some work into it. I mean, you got to this point to be able to get attention. So go the rest of the way. Next slide. So we're talking, and it's during an interview where you're interacting with folks, whether it's the preliminary technical phone interview or a more formal one. I think all of these are critically important. I consider these all the time myself when I go interview. The idea is to try and set yourself up for success. And it doesn't mean that you spend the entire time with your mouth open talking all the way through. It's just as important to be able to listen and engage with that person, communicate as opposed to just talk. Be clear on what it is that they're looking for and make sure that you get them the responses that they need. If they were a customer across the table from you, not somebody interviewing for you for a job, how would you engage with them then? Because keep in mind what they're envisioning on the other side of the table, I guarantee you, is how is this person going to do if we stick them in a conference room with a bunch of other coworkers and we need to get them to collaborate together, And much more of our work nowadays is collaboration. It's not just sitting somewhere crunching numbers. It's actually working with somebody or engaging, asking questions, getting feedback, things like that. So I definitely recommend making it a dialogue and engagement effort with that team member, with that person that you're talking to. Okay. Next slide. These are specific questions that I threw out there that came front of mind. So if you get anything out of my presentation, I recommend you steal this. These are some of the questions I've heard come up in interviews. Some of this is stuff I've extrapolated based on conversations I've had with team members or with candidates. There's more than these out there in the world, obviously. One of my sets of interview tips, I have a set of interview tips, and one of them includes a link to a blog from somebody who had actually worked here and basically deconstructed what we look for in interviews. I recommend visiting that and reading through that because he expands on this a bit. But these are some of the samples or examples of what we may ask during an interview. This isn't comprehensive. These are just samples. But it gives you hopefully some idea or some thought. Much of our interviews tend to be experiential, so it's not just somebody sits and asks you a question, gets you an answer, and that's it. They may ask you to code something. They may ask you to whiteboard a solution. They may ask you to work through design a workflow. They may ask you to run an exercise to make something happen. If they ask you to code, be aware they may test that code at the end of that question. So they ask you to code something, you put it together, you throw it up there, and then they actually run it to see whether or not you know what you're talking about. So just be aware of that. Those are the kind of things that they may vet for. Okay. Next slide, please. It's all over. I had a chance to make it through. I talked to 5 people, got to know the company a bit, answered their questions, and now it's all over. My work is done, right? No, you got to focus on connecting and staying connected and making sure that you maintain that dialogue with the team. At least if you're interested to stay on the radar. Now, if you connect with them and all you were interested in is just getting information, you want to move on, or you're not interested anymore, you can forego all of this. It doesn't matter. But if you are interested and at some point you want to work for this company, unfortunately, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. The person who stays front of mind probably at least gets the feedback and hopefully eventually the job. So you gotta kind of stay out there, make sure that they're aware. I do recommend balance because hiring teams are busy, recruiters are busy, they have other priorities, especially hiring teams. Hiring is just one of the things that they do. They also actually support the work that they do. But, if you don't get their attention, the bias or presupposition is, if I don't hear from you, obviously you're not interested, right? And the worst that they can say is, no, thank you, we're not interested, but at least you know. So I definitely recommend staying engaged. Next slide. Or is that all the slides that are there?
Sorry, it might just be a little stuck.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, I nailed it. They want me. I know that, they've mentioned that they're working on an offer. I'm really excited. Whatever it is, I'm there. I'm on board. I want to work for these guys. Well, hold on. You still need some details here. You need to find out about the position itself. Is it a data scientist? Is it an analyst role? Are you an individual contributor, or are you a manager? You got to also find out, does it have everything that you want or care about? Don't just assume they're going to take care of you. Know for a fact, because you're making a change in your life. I definitely recommend walking with eyes wide open. I don't communicate. I don't ever talk to a candidate unless I know for a fact that they're clear on exactly what they're walking into. Now, maybe they don't care. Maybe, it's a job. It pays money. We're good. But if they need any information, I want to make sure that I'm at least providing it, or providing them access to resources to get it. I'm hopeful that candidates, have the same mindset. If you don't I typically don't buy a car without at least getting a chance to see it. Well, in this case, make sure you clearly understand what you're walking into. Because the worst thing that you want is you take a job, 6 months in later, you're like, oh, frustrated. This is not what I wanted. And that's because you didn't do your due diligence up front. You gotta understand exactly what the expectations are and what you're walking into, so that then you understand whether or not you're being compensated fairly for what for the job that they want you to do. And then also make sure that you manage that transition out. Ultimately, I don't think it behooves anybody to dump on the company that you're leaving unless they were horrible to you, because you never know where that might lead. I mean, I've worked with some folks where they had decided to just, check out and go and work for somebody else. And then lo and behold, a year later, that company that they just joined was bought out by the prior company that they had worked for, making things really awkward for them to come back. It doesn't help anybody to burn bridges. So I recommend staying professional, make sure you work out a reasonable transition period, and then walk away gracefully. And then you never know what the circumstances may bring you, come around to be in the future. Okay. Next slide, please. I know that was really brief. God, I ran through that presentation. It took exactly 30 minutes. Hopefully there was enough detail for it to make sense. I'll close out just mentioning that this is my contact information, by the way. Anybody that pings me through here, I ask that you reference this presentation, the RMDS Labs presentation. Otherwise, I'm not going to know who you are. I get inundated by folks all the time asking to connect. And for the most part, I don't know where they come from. I don't mind connecting. I don't automatically connect with every single person that asks. But I am inclined or interested to, especially to connect with people that came and found me through here. So please reference that. That being said, I'm open to any questions that folks may have. I don't know if anybody has anything necessarily burning. Erica, can we shift to the chat thing and see if any questions may have come across?
Yep, we'll have a look. I don't see any at the moment, but
okay, that's fine.
We can give people a minute to type if they want. In the meantime, you guys will all get an email tomorrow with a copy or a link to the recording, and also I'll upload the slides. So if there's anything you missed, or if you came in a little bit late, you'll still be able to access all the information.
So if there aren't any questions, I may pose questions to this group directly, and then just ask if anybody's interested to chime in. Why don't we start with this? I'm just curious where folks come from. It doesn't have to be through the chat. If you're open to just speaking to that, I'd be curious as to why folks are interested or potentially interested to hear about this topic, kind of what your kind of background or walk of life is. Is there anybody that'd be interested to speak up? No one, hey? Are you guys all I'm in the back last two rows of the class when it gets taught and I slide in and just kind of hide, or? Okay. Okay, great. Emilio, if you don't mind my asking, you mentioned that you're new to computer science. Have you been are you kind of fresh to the industry and to schooling, or have you had like a prior career that you transitioned or pivoted from? And you can either answer in the chat or speak if you're interested. No? A little bit of engineering. That's cool. What I found that was interesting, what I've run into lately a lot is folks that are pivoting or transitioning from other industries. I get a lot of lately. I've seen people that are migrating out of industries like semiconductor and manufacturing. I have one of my colleagues right now. I'm not sure if he's necessarily pursuing a data related field, but he just finished up tenure at a company that I had worked for about 7 years, and he had actually worked there probably closer to like 20 or possibly 25 years, leaving as a director of engineering, and he just left just recently. And I'm curious to find out. Oh, no microphone. That's fine. You know, what direction that he goes in next. He's his whole background is in mechanical engineering and all of that. I'm going to read this out if you don't mind, Alan. I'll just mention it. Been having difficulty not getting past the second interview, so I want to know what am I missing, and you hit on some of the points I needed. Okay, or I missed. Yeah, the second interview is tough. When you say second, are you talking about going from a phone interview to a formal on-site, or are you talking about from a second phone interview to maybe another more in-depth technical interview? There's a distinction there. In our organization, usually we do 1 or 2 phone interviews, and then we move to a formal on-site, which is a full-blown panel of about maybe 5 to 6 evaluators. Some of that is timing, obviously. Yes, I got the phone interview, but never heard back after. How long ago did the phone interview happen? If you don't mind me asking, Alan. 2 weeks? Okay. Did they give you directed feedback, or they basically went into a black hole? You haven't heard from them since? Some are black holes, some are email reply. The ones that are in a black hole, the first thing I check on is the rec still active? So the position that you had applied for, or they mapped you to, or mentioned, I'd go back and see if the position is still posted. Because if it is, and or if the recruiter that you engage with is still out there saying they need people, then most likely the position hasn't been filled. Now, in some cases, 2 weeks is not necessarily a dramatic amount of time. In some cases, what they may be doing, what I've seen some hiring teams do, is out of the 2 week span, they may have talked to 3 or 4 candidates or more, and maybe they're trying to get to a point where they shortlist the folks that go to the next round. Or in some cases, maybe they haven't made up their mind yet. The first interview that you had, was it just a very simple phone interview, or was it more like they actually had you code or design something during the call? Any feedback there? Okay, still thinking. Oh, coding and ask some general questions. To me, from that, I think they should have at least given you a directed answer. Are you still in the running? I think it's fair to ask. Now, keep in mind, many recruiters aren't just hiring for the one or a few roles. For me personally, I usually maintain a rec load somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15 to 20 positions at any given time. And I'm working on interviews, offers, onboarding. So there's a combination of different activity streams at the same time. First thing I'd ask is just to ping that recruiter that you work with or your point of contact and ask them bluntly, is the position still being, whichever role it is that you've connected and had interviewed for, that'll help you figure out what the next steps need to look like. If the role is still being interviewed for, you're still in the running for it, I'd ask them specifically, what is the expectation here? In other words, what can I look forward to? Now, if the answer comes back, you know what, we were able to interview, we're just not interested, unfortunately there's just not the right fit. Try to get them to be as specific as you possible on the feedback. Again, balance that against coming across as obnoxious or stalking them, or harassing them. You want to be cordial and professional about this. But again, the intent or goal would be, I'm interested to get enough feedback to help me to be better at what I do. I can't grow if I don't understand where my gaps are. And so you want to be, it's the same thing as when you engage with a client and you get something wrong. How do you advance? How do you move forward from there? Well, first you have to figure out what went wrong, and you need to be able to figure out a way to address it. In some cases, I'd also ask, it depends on your interest level. You may decide, you know what, not worth my time, not interested. I connected with them, I didn't have a good warm and fuzzy feeling. They just didn't seem like a place I wanted to be at. And that's fine. You can write them off. But if it does seem like a place that you may potentially want to work for in the future, ask them, okay, so I've had gaps of some kind. Would I still be eligible to interview here in the future if I'm able to close those gaps? And, what can I do to pick up learning or experience to help me bridge that? Some companies have formal policies. You interview, like I went and interviewed with Facebook, and what was interesting is they turned me down more than once, which was really fun to get turned down by the same company more than once. They actually have an internal policy or protocol where if you interview, you have to wait a certain window of time before you can interview next, at least for recruiting roles. And so I would interview, and then I'd have to wait for like 6 months or whatever, and then I'd get the next one. I go interview, and then that didn't necessarily work out for that different team. And so it's you gotta be patient with it also. Okay. Well, welcome, Lida, out of Indonesia. Wow, I am curious. What time is it over there? Is it like in the middle of the night or middle of the morning or something like that tomorrow, I gather?
It's still like 8:38 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, okay.
So we got like 14-hour difference between here and LA. Yeah.
Oh, no, not too bad.
Sorry.
I find it interesting for international hiring that mostly in tech, there isn't dramatically too much of a dramatic difference, but sometimes the cultural thing is a bit different. Work processes and kind of protocol for when people go to work, how they, kind of line out their day is different. I've done some hiring to be able to get people, or sourced out of or hired out of Mexico and also South American, like Central South American countries. And the work week is just different in terms of the days of the week when folks are working and kind of the hours that they take for lunch, things like that. So I find that interesting. Hopefully stuff is interesting here. Thank you, Lida, by the way, I appreciate that. As a teacher before getting training in computer science and machine learning, is it normal to get a job in data science before getting a job more focused on machine learning? That's a good question. I wish I had a great answer for you. I think it depends on the environment. Much of the time when folks recruit for a machine learning engineer, for example, they're very particular or specific on what they look for. But in our environment, I'm hiring for a machine learning engineer now. The formal title is staff data scientist. But the hiring manager wants a machine learning engineer and basically the competency of what that person will do for his team. The thing is, I gather that you're interested, Mia, that you're interested in pursuing this. You're pivoting from being a teacher and moving into a tech field. Were you by chance a teacher in a tech space, like for example, teaching for either a high school or university where you were doing like STEM of some kind? If not, it may be a little bit more difficult to position moving into that field unless you're going very entry level. Math teacher, yeah, that might work. At least I imagine or anticipate you'd have the basics down for the mathematical concepts. Yeah, and then trained as a STEM teacher. Yeah, that might work. What if you're hiring a foreigner? I have some folks over here who are looking for opportunities to work in the U.S. That's tough because, Lida, let me go back to Mia's thing about being a teacher. Level of responsibility depends, and it also depends on the environment that you're stepping into. Were you able to do any kind of internships ahead of moving into this field, or you're not there yet? Because if you're able to add some practical work experience doing specific data science or machine learning type of work, it may make it easier to transition into a formal job doing that. If not, you're probably looking at moving into something like an internship or co-op first, just to build a practical experience. But again, I don't know what a STEM teacher, a mathematics teacher does. Yeah, okay. See, that makes sense. My first instinct for the internship is, going back to the same company that employed you as an intern to see what kind of opportunities are there. If not, then making or maintaining those solid connections with those hiring folks to see what kind of connections in industry can help open the doors for you. Ultimately, you are banking off of an internship project, but it also depends on the scope and what you've done and how well you've done. Performance, even on an internship, is still valuable. Going back to the question for Lita about hiring a foreigner, that's tough. It's a little bit tough because mostly the process to hire somebody that's not in country and happens to be a foreign national is considerably harder than being able to get somebody who's already here on a H-1B visa or other kind of visa that we need to transfer. Or say, for example, they're coming from Mexico or Canada on a TN visa or something like that. It is an intricate, involved process. That's why we don't tend to go out of country to go hire, per se, or source. It isn't impossible. But, what we may be looking for then is, if somebody's a foreign national, do they have ties here? Were they already planning to live here? They have family here. They have a support network, for them to be able to connect with. Not that that's a prerequisite to working for the company, but, it does speak to their stability. What have they done in their prior roles? If they work for a company that's similar to ours, say, for example, with regard to Walmart, is in retail e-commerce, somebody who's done that overseas in a similar environment to ours, are they somebody with a scarce skill set we can't replicate here? That makes it a little bit easier to try and, justify, okay, we need to get this person here because nobody here does that work. It depends on what we're talking about here, but like I said, you're not talking about something that's super common. You're talking about the exception to the norm, really. Okay.
Totally understand, Steve. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else that has any questions or anything that you're curious about? I don't have every single answer, but I usually have something to say about most questions, so that's valuable. But I don't know. Does anybody else want to chime in on where they come from or anything else they'd like to share? If not, I'm generally in pretty good shape here. I'll go on to the final thought thing, if that'll help. Brief introduction. Okay. What language do you use in machine learning? It's similar in terms of coding languages. So, for example, Python. Our backend kind of software stack would be, Java and other comparable technologies that people code in. I hear TensorFlow thrown around a lot, iterations of that. We have folks that also combine machine learning with big data. So for example, if you have a background in things like, or skills with, or exposure to things like Hadoop, Hive, Spark, PySpark, it's valuable here. As far as other things beyond that, keep in mind, I'm not an engineer by trade. I can't specifically tell you this is exactly what we work on. I can tell you generally what my teams ask for. And those are kind of typically front of mind. Some of the other languages I mentioned in that other slide are some of the things that we are looking for, striving to find out in industry. So I have a hiring manager right now that is interested in hiring for operations research. And he's looking for skills with software packages like Cplex and Gurobi, which I've never heard of before. There are other exotic technologies that we work with. For example, some folks work with CID, CD tools, continuous integration, continuous development type of tool sets. Cloud environment type of tools, so Azure, GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform or other comparable technologies. We're Walmart, and our direct competitor is obviously the big box retailer to the north that I won't mention their names, but expertise working with their cloud environment is still valuable to us because best practices still work or apply. So even if we may not necessarily use the technology, there may be some alignment with what the best practices are for what people code in for what we do. I've had people, one of the questions that comes up is you guys predominantly use Python for what you code in, right? For data. Great. I don't know Python, but I knew C++ or I knew C++. Is that something I could potentially code in during the interview? Yes, potentially. If you're able to master one language and it's close enough to some of the other languages like Python, our team might be still comfortable connecting with you and getting to know you a bit. It depends on how open the team is to bringing on somebody that they have to groom, and how competent they are with picking up a language, learning its libraries, understanding its syntax, things like that. In some cases, some of the teams are very rigid. I need somebody who knows Elasticsearch, for a search recommendation engine. Unfortunately, I can't hire somebody who doesn't know it. Therefore, I have to go out to market and find the person that only has that skill, or Solr or whatever else. And in other cases, they could be open to it because they have the bandwidth, they have the people that can mentor that person. They have an environment that is not so stressful, and they can kind of groom you and pull you along. Why don't we, is there any other burning questions out there? Or any other, if not, then I recommend, Erica, we go to the last slide, which is the final thoughts thing.
Okay, one moment.
Any last questions? Either speak up or chat, or you can ping me, wherever it makes sense to reach me. You have to forgive me my use of the Lego clip art. I don't know if anybody really saw that or not. I mentioned it like early on in the beginning. I really wrestled with that, by the way, because to me, on a certain level, it's not professional, obviously. But I find Lego is fun. It actually is therapeutic for me. It allows me a means to kind of visualize those weird engineering ideas that I have in my head. So that's why I like using it. Okay, so there's a few different things in here. I'm not going to read line by line, but I did want to have this up so people can kind of see what are rolling around in my head when I think about best practices. At the top of the list is, something to keep in mind about the job search thing, data, but job search in general. It is an iterative and a collaborative process. And what I mean by that is it's similar to like working in an agile fashion in a software development house. What you do is you work at it and you iterate on it, as opposed to you do one specific thing and at the end there's a result. You break this into the bits and pieces and you work on those and you find success as you go and you build on that success. That's what I mean by that in terms of iterative. So there's going to be times when you find you need to, you get the one win by connecting with somebody who accepted a networking connection, great. And then you build on that. Who do you know? What can I learn about, what you do, or, is there any advice that you can share? It's a collaborative process where you don't just do this alone. I mean, even if you do and you apply to jobs and you get hired, you got to work for somebody. So you got to learn how to be able to connect and collaborate with others to facilitate that. If you don't, then ultimately what you're talking about is self-employment and never having to connect with anybody again. And I don't necessarily see that as how the world works overall. So, you got to learn how to play nice with others. The next thing down, it refers back to something that a professor of mine mentioned one time, which was don't just assume that what people tell you works. You've got to test it and make sure that it does, especially when it comes to being able to further your career. So no matter what advice I may give you, no matter what advice anybody else may give you, you're a shoo-in to get something. Don't necessarily believe it until you've actually tested it and put it into production. You need to make sure that if you are going to eventually land the job that you want, you've got to make sure that what you're doing actually works. So test it out in front of other people. Before you go interview, connect with people and maybe do mock interviews. have somebody grill you on the questions that that you could potentially face in an interview, so you know that you're presenting the way you want to. You know, this other stuff, it is some of it's kind of tongue in cheek, like the explore, learn, and have fun. I believe in this. I don't believe that a job search should be something that is like a absolute chore. You do enough work day to day, or most people do. So really use this as a means to kind of explore and get yourself out there and have fun. Try to find something that is really going to captivate you and excite you about it. That's why I think data is really an interesting thing, interesting field. It impacts so much out there in the world. Of all of this, I think the last bullet point is probably one of the most important, and it is, you know, when it comes to being able to have a healthy job search, sometimes you got to stop, disconnect, take a breath, you know, reward yourself for what what you have been able to accomplish. You need to recharge. If you don't, you know, you run the risk of burning out. And so many people do that. That's why I think a lot of times they quit jobs, or they suffer, you know, mired in a position that they don't really like or enjoy because they just stress out too much. The job search shouldn't kill you. It should help open doors so that you can go find that next great thing. So you got to also make sure you take care of yourself. Okay. That's it. That's everything. I don't know if there's any other information. Maybe in future versions of this, I'll have something better. But that's the extent of it for today. So, by the way, I wanted to say thank you so much to Erica for helping me out, because clicking the button with my finger is a chore, and I really appreciate anybody that could step up and help me there when I do these things.
And thank you for all your good information. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to provide you with a recording of this, maybe at the end of the day tomorrow, if not by Monday, and also a copy of the slides. So thank you again to Mr. Navarro, and thank you everybody for attending.
Sure, no problem. Thank you so much. All right. I'm going to drop off. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.